Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, it's Diagnosis Murder with debut novelist and registered nurse Christine Falcone. Christine is the author of X'd Out, the first mystery to feature visiting nurse Melanie Bass. When Melanie shows up at a local commuter lot to assume shared custody of her beloved terrier Bruno, she has the distinct misfortune of discovering her philandering ex-husband's dead body along with an unknown female companion. And while the authorities seem to believe it may have been a random robbery, at least initially, she doesn't, and soon finds herself investigating personal and professional ties that may hit too close to home for comfort. The book's publication coincides with Christine's retirement, which follows nearly 40 years dedicated to working in a Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. During that time, she also published short stories in publications such as Imagine, Lancrom Review, and the anthology Deadfall, crime stories by New England writers. She is a longtime member of a writers group that includes fellow Connecticut authors Roberta Islib, aka Lucy Burdett, and Ange Pompano. X'd Out's release fulfills Christine's longtime dream of writing a full-length novel. New York Times bestselling author Hallie Efron noted, "Fans of crime fiction will welcome a savvy new sleuth, Melanie Bass, a nurse who knows death when she sees it." Now, get your pens out and pads ready. Connecticut's own Christine Falcone is about to give you the prescription for good storytelling. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. Today, I am in conversation with Connecticut's own Christine Falcone, who is the author of X'd Out, which is available right now from Level Best Books. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Hi, thanks, John. I'm glad to be here.
It's so nice to have you here. We were just saying, I've had, every member of your writers group on, so, it seemed only fitting. But hey, you get your own episode just for you. So,
I know, special.
yeah, you are special. This book is special. It was so much fun to read, so I'm excited to talk to you all about it. It's the first of what I hope will be many, many Melanie Bass mysteries. And, she has the dubious distinction as this book opens of discovering not only her ex-husband's dead body, but also the very dead body of a mystery woman. So I'm wondering, if you can tell me how that discovery not only sets the stage for the investigation that ensues, but also sort of her own internal sense of conflict, given the history that she had with Artie.
Well, because she is a nurse, she immediately, thinks that checks to make sure she can help the two victims when she comes upon them. But also, she's conflicted with her ex-husband. I mean, she's glad to be divorced from him, but she also has, she did love the man once, so she does still have some feelings to him. She didn't really want him dead necessarily, just out of her life, and to leave her alone because they had to share, possession of their dog, and she just wanted Bruno all to herself because she really felt this is her dog and not Artie's, but he insisted on having the dog at some time. And the woman, she doesn't know, but she immediately jumps the conclusion that, well, he was a cheater when I was married to him, so maybe he's cheating on his present wife now.
Sure. And so I wanted to ask you to expand a bit on Artie's character, if you don't mind. What about him leads Melody to believe that his death may be more than an isolated incident or a random robbery, given what she knows about him both personally and professionally?
Well, again, she suspects, well, maybe he was cheating and maybe the woman's partner. That's her first reaction. Maybe woman's partner found out about it and was obviously upset and came to take care of both of them, which unfortunately in real life sometimes does happen. But also then when she thinks back about how she found the scene, she remembers that, the car was actually kind of cleaned out. And if it had been like a robbery, you think someone would have thrown things around or whatever, looking for something valuable to take. Or so that makes her a little bit suspicious that, and then when speaking to the police, she kind of gets the impression that maybe they're not too sure that, was a random killing also, so that's basically where suspicions come in.
Sure. And I wanted to ask you too, because I think one of the difficult things about having an amateur sleuth is, finding ways to sort of legitimize what they're doing other than mere curiosity or the desire to know what happened to somebody you knew. But there are a couple of reasons beyond that Melanie sort of investigates this case. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, talking about that briefly and how that lends a bit of credence to what she's doing.
Well, again, first of all, because she did know him intimately at one point, she's curious to find out exactly did happen and how he got himself in this, situation where now he's dead. She's curious to know who that woman is that he was in the car with and why he was with her, because again, upon reflection, her first impression of the woman is she actually doesn't look like somebody I would think Artie would be cheating with, because she looks a little, not to say, but a little rough around the edges, when he usually would go for a different type of woman, or so she thinks anyway. So she's curious about that. And then things start happening to her. She would back off, just being curious and liking to know what happened. But then things start happening to her that kind of suck her back into what happened to Artie, connect her back to his death.
Sure. And I should probably let people know that Artie was a dermatologist, pretty well known, pretty sought after. And so
Right.
after he dies, they actually ask, Melanie to help go through his office, his belongings.
Right.
And
Right.
there's the question of whether or not, she might come into possession through doing that. So again, another avenue in which she gets involved in the investigation, which makes it, a little bit more legitimate than just saying, hey, this was my ex-husband and I need to know what happened, or I need to clear my name.
Right.
But you mentioned too, and I find this fascinating, that you and Melanie share a background in nursing, though your specific jobs were a bit different. But I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you can talk about, how you're able to channel your experiences into her character, and then also how that training and experience really benefits her abilities and perceptions, because she's not just, the fainting female who finds a body and doesn't know what to do with herself. She has a very clear sort of code of conduct.
Right. And that's part of it. It's just kind of ingrained in her to be a helper, to be a person that wants to get involved and help people and find out what's going on, and to not, she can kind of click off her fainting female or fainting any person that finds a dead body. That, I mean, sure, her first instinct is to snap into action mode. What can I do? How does this, relate to me, and that I could be of a help in this situation. So, I mean, that part of her, that's kind of ingrained in nurses too. I think you kind of, I will say that sometimes when you come upon an accident, a person passing out in the grocery store, you're like, oh no. You really should rush to help, and you're a little bit nervous about it, but that's kind of ingrained in you when you're a nurse, that you kind of are a helper.
Sure, yes, the nurses are the ones that are, running in when everybody else is probably
Right.
running away or
Right.
stepping back slowly. And the nice thing too about Melanie's job is she's a visiting nurse, so she has a little bit more flexibility with her schedule than some people might. So, she can do other things and do investigations while still doing her work, and,
Right.
job to
But
come
my
back.
other thought with that is too, it might lend her into coming in more into situations. And if she worked in the hospital, she might come more into situations where she would come upon things that aren't quite right.
Right. And interesting too, visiting nurse, you're going into people's homes. You're not only taking care of, your clients, but their family, their friends. You have a lot of contact there. So probably a lot of potential for, future Melanie Bass books.
That's my hope
Hopefully.
anyway.
Well, it's my hope too, after having read it. But I wanted to ask you too, we talked a little bit about what you channel into Melanie as a character, but you had a long career in nursing in the neonatal, I want to get this correct, intensive care unit, which I would assume
Right.
is a very sort of intense, all-consuming job. So I wanted to ask you about, how you found catharsis through writing, because, you were doing that job, taking care of a family and writing. And I have to assume that you found something through writing that you weren't getting elsewhere in life. So would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, well, for one thing, you could kind of direct the story, and what's going to happen when you're writing. You could have things turn out as you want them to turn out. You can always make yourself the heroine or the hero of the situation, when you're writing. Where in real life, you do your best, but things don't always turn out as you would like them to turn out. So that's one aspect of release. Also, but the working too kind of drains you, and that's why one reason it took me a long time to write this book. I didn't have as much time, or I would say emotional or intellectual energy sometimes, to sit down and really focus on writing the plot. What was going to happen.
Sure. I have to say I'm impressed that that you did that and managed to write anything, no matter how long it took to be published. And you've done short stories too, which we'll talk about.
Right.
But I guess it must be nice. In nursing, you have to be very precise and exact. I mean, you mess up on a measurement or something, and
That's right. That could have severe
that
consequences.
can be very bad. But then you write a novel and you sort of get to engage a more creative side of yourself. So I think there must be some great fulfillment in that.
Right.
All right, so you mentioned, so Melanie has a dog, Bruno, who is very much, a character in this book. He's a little cute terrier, and actually there he is, right on the book cover. But I wanted to ask you about writing animal characters. I'm always fascinated by that, and whether or not you find it easier or more difficult than writing human characters. How is it that you develop an animal to have that unique personality and presence?
Well, I think those of us have pets kind of know you kind of imbue them with a personality or kind of give them human characteristics, and you think you know what they're thinking, half the time. So really, it's kind of fun to write an animal and have them respond as you think you'd like them to respond or how you think they would actually respond. That's one thing, but I found a lot of fun to write Bruno. Plus, I mean, it's when you have an animal sidekick, so to speak, they don't answer you back or act officially, but you could talk to them and you just get that unconditional love from them, so they're always some kind of emotional support for you. So I enjoyed writing about her having a dog.
Sure,
And
Bruno.
also when I was saying, also when I was starting the story and I had the idea as to what they could share, and I thought, well, no, not a child, because that's like a real landmine. I mean,
Right.
like, and what about how emotionally, and then she finds her husband dead, and they have a child. But I thought a dog, which obviously you love, I mean, when you have a pet like that, you love them like a child many times, that's a different situation, or I thought anyway.
Sure. No, I thought that was very clever, shared custody of a dog and how that sort of keeps them in communication. And the other thing I actually really liked about it is we find that Artie over time really, really came to love Bruno, and that was
Right.
reciprocated. And it sort of gives you more of an appreciation, for his character beyond the bad aspects that we hear about. So that was a fun little way to give him a little more depth too.
Yeah. That was one thing I thought when I was writing the book is I actually wanted Artie to me actually was one of the characters in the book. And I was trying to develop him after his death is through what people said about him and what they thought about him to actually make him a character in the book.
Right, it works so well. And the interesting thing is, the story opens at a commuter lot where they're supposed to be exchanging custody of the dog, and she, stumbles upon him locked in a car, windows up, and you think, man, this guy must be terrible if he is not in the vehicle, left the dog alone, and
Right.
then you realize, all right, something far worse actually happened to him. And so it's kind of a reversal of your initial impression of him, which again, I thought was a really interesting thing to do. But moving right along, I wanted to ask you too, Melanie has occasion to come upon and have relationships with Artie's other ex-wives, one of which she knew about and one of which is kind of a surprise. And I'm wondering if you would just give us a bit of insight into their characters and how dealing with them really helps the self-revelatory process for Melanie, because she kind of learns a lot about herself through her interactions with Artie's, other female companions.
Right. Well, she really dislikes his present wife, Tori. She feels that she's kind of a ruthless character, or I mean, maybe not ruthless is the correct word. As she confesses later, she's just very self-centered. She feels like whatever she wants, she should get, she should have it, whatever the consequences for anybody else. And that's how she kind of lured Artie into, breaking up with Melanie and marrying her. But she's shocked to find out that he'd been married before. And also kind of shocked that she likes the first wife. And they do have something in common, Artie, for one thing, and that both of them, he was a cheater on both of them. So, they had that in common, and that spending time together, they actually come to like each other.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's
also,
kind of refreshing to see.
yeah, well, that's what I thought. The old trope is like, oh, hating the previous wives or whatever. But what if you actually like them and become friends with them, So
Yeah, it was
that's where I was going.
interesting. And, as you were mentioning, Tori does come across as kind of very self-centered, and she sort of gets all of the things that, Melanie initially thought she wanted, the big house and the property. And then Melanie realizes that, hey, maybe I didn't really need those things to be fulfilled all along. And, she's sort of happy with her cottage, which sits across from the marsh. And I actually wanted to ask you about that because the book is set largely in Guilford, which is obviously a place that you're intimately, familiar with. And you can get the sense from looking at this cover that in the midst of all this chaos and crime, there's some calmness and some tranquility to it. So I'm wondering if you can talk about what it is about Guilford that you wanted to convey upon the page and how, that atmosphere helps in this particular story.
Yes, well, it's kind of like Guilford, Madison, the two towns combined. And I just, just the small town quality of it, the fact that it is on the shoreline, even you know, and that Melanie loves being near the beach and near the water, and she finds it very calming and relaxing. That's why I put ham and acid in so much. As I love to walk the trail myself, you know, take the dog walking there and walk the trail and walk along the beach. So it is the tranquility kind of, and also it aids her, as I said a couple of times in the book, where she's had a rough day or something bad has gone on, she can kind of like loosen up, just go walking or running along the beach or the trails. And around her is also kind of a calm place. It's kind of, you know, where she lives, she's off the beaten track in her cottage, and she enjoys that. She enjoys being away from the hubbub of everything going on.
Sure. It was kind of like a nice little mental trip for me. I almost felt at times like I was taking a walk along the beach, which was nice, especially now that it's getting very cold in Connecticut.
Right.
Um, but anyway, we talked about X'd Out being your first book, and you've been working on it a long time because you were doing many other things that were occupying your time. But you are sort of a veteran of the short story. You've been writing all along. You've published stories. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the differences and similarities between form versus something short versus something long, and then how you found transitioning from something short to something much longer to be, given those similarities and differences.
Well, I enjoyed writing short stories. I started out with short stories because I think, as a lot of writers do, you think that, well, short stories are easy because they're short. But in fact, they're really pretty hard because you have to get the whole story in many fewer words than you would in a book. And you don't have the room to expand on, background and setting and whatever. You have to do that within a couple of words. I've even written a couple of shorts, which are fun if you can get them to work, because you tell a whole thing. A lot of it's through nuance that people say, oh yeah, I know what they're getting at there, even without you spelling it out. So I enjoy the short stories. One reason I transitioned to writing a book was there weren't very many markets for short stories. It was hard to find a place to send them. So, and plus other people in my writing group, a lot of people I knew are writing books. So I decided to try a novel. And first it was a little hard. And actually the first version, even now I tend to write short. I have to go back and fill in a lot more details or whatever. But so it was a little hard to expand what you were telling and kind of relax and tell yourself, no, I have time to really explain things a little bit more or set the scene a little more scene setting for what's going on. And you don't have to rush into the story. So now I like it. I've tried writing a couple of short stories. It's a little bit harder to flip back again to the short stories now that I've gotten into writing novels, but it's still fun. I still enjoy writing short stories. So I just spent this weekend thinking, gee, I'd like to think of another idea for a quick short story, kind of a palette.
At least there's sort of that more instantaneous gratification with the short story.
Exactly.
But I always admire people who can write both, because it's so funny. People who exclusively write short stories tend to say that they're so intimidated by the thought of the novel because it's so long, and novelists say they're intimidated by the idea of the short story because it's so short. So it's interesting perspective, especially from somebody who's had success with both. But we've mentioned a few times that you are a member of, at this point, a very long-term writers group with Roberta Islip, who a lot of people know is Lucy Burdett, and also Ange Pompano, who's written some mysteries and short stories as well. And I was wondering, if you can tell me, what are the benefits of having a group like that, not only in terms of the craft itself, but sort of also the more emotional well-being of authors and creatives, when a lot of times you might be surrounded by people who don't necessarily understand that particular life.
That's true. It is very supporting to have good friends and writing partners, so to speak, as they are, because they do give you a lot of emotion. They do understand what you're going through. They do understand your disappointment when things don't work out, and they could be very encouraging. They could tell you get over it when you're upset about something, and that or give you an example from their own careers where they've gone through, or you just know it from knowing them for so long. You know that similar things have happened to them, disappointments or encouragements. And joy, they really understand your joy when you succeed with your novel or with or sell a short story. So that's good. And as far as the writing itself, it's wonderful, because I think when you interviewed them last summer or summer before, I'm not sure which it was, they said that we're good at brainstorming and bouncing things off each other too. If we get stuck, it's great to have somebody that knows your characters, knows your writing, and say, how about this or how about that? And many times it may not be a suggestion you could use, but you'd say, oh, you just made me think of something else when you said that. So it does help to solve your problems and send you tales of woe and joy, just to share them together.
Sure. And I have to say, one of my favorite parts of this book is just really a simple scene where Melanie is taking care of this sort of cantankerous, older gentleman, and he's an aficionado of mysteries. He gets sent to the hospital, and she worries that he might not have any murder mysteries to read. And so she brings him a few. And, one is a golf lover's mystery, and one is about a detective who investigates in Savannah. And there's no name dropping, but people who are familiar with Roberta, Lucy, and Ange will know that those are their books, which I thought
Yeah,
was
there were a couple Easter eggs I put in there for people to find.
yeah, that's fun. And to follow up on the writers group, I wanted to ask you too. I think that, giving and receiving constructive criticism can probably be difficult, and it's sort of a learned task. Can you speak to that? And then also, how you know when to listen to what they're telling you versus what your instincts when they might be in conflict with one another.
Well, well, you know when to listen because, and sometimes you don't. You'll say, no, why did they say that? That's, but you make a note of it or you remember it. And then later on you think about it, you go, no, you know what? They're right. And so, you may resist it at first, but sometimes you really see the point that another member is making. And and you kind of grow into the comfort with giving and accepting criticism because you really have to be honest when you're giving criticism of someone else's work. Otherwise, it really doesn't help. And I think you really have to get comfortable with people before you could do that, or they have to be comfortable with you and know that I'm going to tell you something, take it for what it's worth, but I'm just trying to help you out with this.
Sure.
So
And I guess, after 20 some odd years or whatever it is
that's
now,
right. Yeah.
gives you a little more
We don't
confidence.
even soften the blows anymore sometimes. It's like, oh my God, no. But which can be painful, but not so much anymore because we take it for what it's worth, that we know that they're only looking out for our best thing. And I say we've become friends, so we don't really get offended at what people say because we know it's just about the work, and and if it hits them that way, it might hit somebody else the same way. So it's worth considering changing a scene or changing a character or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. And it's nice to have those few, trusted voices. And I think when it is a few, it's probably easier to deal with than 20 or 30 people giving you their opinions. Um,
Oh, for sure.
But just a few more questions for you, and then I will let you get back to life and your own dog. But I wanted to ask you, I'm going to take you back a few years really quickly, but the book is dedicated to your parents who you say really inspired sort of your love and appreciation of reading and storytelling. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, just talking about that for a moment and what the books or authors or stories were that really connected with you at a young age.
Well, my mother always was reading. She always was reading. She especially loved mystery. So that got me into that. Many times I would read, she would pass, as I became an adult, she passed books along to me. When I was younger, I would read books that I found around the house that were or magazines even. I used to love to read some outdoor magazine about bear attacks for some reason. But anyway, so there was that. And my father, I remember being young and him always reading to us, and I can't remember the name of the series. It was a children's series about information. One volume would be just like stories and one would be science and whatever. Don't read every night. He would read to my brother and I several siblings. I'm the oldest of 8, but he would read. And I remember I loved Paul Bunyan and the story of Francis of Assisi. Those are my 2 favorite stories that he would read to me. So I remember being read to as a child. And like I say, just them both being lifelong readers. And
That's
so that
terrific.
me and encouraging me to read. Always taking me to the library, letting me take out that stack of books or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have that introduction, probably, especially at a young age. It's why I say well-read is well-bred people. But, I want to ask you too, just 2 more questions, but there are people who tune in who are always looking, for words of encouragement or advice. And I think that that can be particularly important coming from someone like you, because you are sort of testament that writing doesn't have to be your first career. It doesn't have to be your second career. It doesn't have to be your only career. So in looking back, particularly in a writing life or just a creative life in general, what do you think is the best advice that you were ever given? And then, of course, the flip side, the best advice that you were never given and had to learn for yourself from actually doing the work.
I think the best advice, I see it all the time now, and I don't always follow it, is just sit down and write. Just sit down and write. I tell people, and they say, oh, I'd like to write a book or whatever. I thought about writing. I say, it doesn't really cost you anything. It's just your time. If you have the time you want to do it, sit down. Nobody is going to stop you, or you don't have to show it to anybody. You can just see how it goes, see if it feels good to you, if it feels like something you want to do. So that was one of the best advice is to just keep your butt in the chair and write. Again, I don't always follow that. I find excuses not to still, but anyway. And I can't think of any of advice that I wish someone had told me. I think most of it, I've read a lot of advice, so I think I don't have anything on the flip side of that.
Fair enough. All right. So, I've asked you all about X'd Out. So now I need to ask you to leave us with a little teaser. Can you divulge anything about what might come next, whether it's a short story or another, hopefully, Melanie Bass mystery?
Well, actually, for X'd Out, I was offered a 3-book contract. So I'm working on the second book in the series. Right now, it's called Borrowed Trouble, and it features Melanie still with Bruno and some of the cast from her first book. And you mentioned Charlie Dugan before, and I loved him. At first, I just had to have her do a visit as a visiting nurse, but then I loved Charlie, kind of an old codger. And there were a couple other characters in there. I said, oh, I really like them. So they're going to continue. At first, I was going to have Lynn just show up and then go back to where she came from. But people in my writing group said, no, she's a good character. Leave her in there. So she's now an intricate part of the books.
Oh, that's terrific. So yeah, you have a nice ensemble going, and I did not realize it was a 3-book deal. That makes me very happy as a reader.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I'm sure that makes you happy as a writer.
Well, yes, eventually. I was a little bit nonplussed at first. I didn't expect that. It was like, oh no, now I've got to get going on that second book. I'd already started it, but I said, well, I really have like a deadline now. I mean, I took forever to write the first book. Now I have to write the second one to deadline, and that was a little scary. It still is a little scary, but we're going along. We're working on it.
And this is retirement, Christine Falcone, right?
Right.
Just another career. Well, Christine Falcone, thank you so much for being here. The book is X'd Out. It is a whole lot of fun. I guarantee you will have a great time with it. So you must pick it up, read it for yourself, gift it to your friends and families, and can't wait to have you back for books 2 and 3 and everything that comes after.
Well, thank you, John. That was wonderful.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.